Hi guys, it's Andrea Edwards, a digital conversationalist, and I have got a very special guest today, Ling Ling Tai, who is,
Hello.
hello darling, the podcaster, Leaders of Learning. We met a few months ago when she featured me on her podcast. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of it.
Thanks for being part of the show. It's so lovely to have you as part of the show.
But I think it's today. Are you going with season 3? You're launching today?
Yep, today I'll be launching the first episode of season 3, and it's a fantastic episode. It'll be with Dr. Parag Khanna, who is a foreign policy advisor strategist, and he'll talk about the future is Asian, which is where we are. You know, future is going to be Asian.
Well, we both heard him speak at the Asia Professional Speakers Conference recently, and he's a phenomenal speaker. But so well done you for getting him on your show, because that it just says so much about how far you've come since you've launched the show. So Leaders of Learning, the podcast, pretty much any podcasting platform that it's out there, you can find Leaders of Learning. Tell us about your journey, because podcasting is really starting to take off in Asia. More and more people are talking about it. Where did you start? Why did you start? And how's the journey been so far?
The journey has been a lot more amazing than I had expected, because 2 years ago I decided to take a break from the corporate world and try to figure out a different life for myself. So I started my own training company, and I knew nothing about business or marketing, because all this while I've been in training or learning and development for 13 or 14 years. At that point in time when I started my company, I was consuming a lot of podcasts. You know, the usual suspects like Freakonomics, Tim Ferriss Show, John Lee Dumas, Entrepreneur on Fire. And I was so motivated to want to start my own podcast, because when I look in the podcast landscape out there, there are not as many shows that come from Asia. The majority of them come from places like the US or the UK. And I thought this would be a great opportunity to increase diversity of voices in the podcast space, and to elevate the voices of Asians in the podcast landscape. So I started my podcast show called The Leaders of Learning. And like the title, it's focused on career development, professional development, and helping the listeners to become better in what they do. So the people I interview are people who are in the learning and development space. They themselves are trainers, or they themselves are experts in a particular field. They are also academics and entrepreneurs too. So the very first episode I started producing, it was in September 2017. And it took me about 4 to 5 months to produce about six to 8 episodes before I decided to launch it in January 2018. And season 1, I've produced about 12 episodes. And I initially produced 12 episodes. It's mostly to test the market to see if podcasting is my thing, because podcasting really takes up a lot of time. Every single episode will take, I don't know, initially because my skill level wasn't so great. The first episode took me about 3 days to produce.
Yeah.
It's been an incredible journey up till today. So today I'm launching first episode of season 3.
Yeah, but you went from that first season where you're getting like 300 downloads a week to how many are you getting a day now?
No, it wasn't 300 downloads a week. So I published probably 10 episodes of season 1 and only got 300 downloads.
Yeah. Okay, but now you're getting?
Now I'm getting 500 to 700 downloads per day. So instead of releasing 10 episodes to get 300 downloads, I get automatically 500 to 700 per day.
Yeah. And you know what? One of the things that so many of the companies that I work with, they're constantly asking me to go out there and find influencers in Asia that these companies can work with. And I'm always encouraging the companies to embrace employees as influencers. But the challenge that I find is when I go out there and look for the influencers and I ask the employees who influences them, they're always US and European based. So I think hats off to you for getting out there and starting. You know, it's still quite a small field in this region. So I think the opportunity to jump onto podcasting is absolutely the right time to do it. But you know, I think we've got to, you can't just do this, right? You've got to really think about it. You've got to be very strategic, you know, what's your focus, right? What do you want to achieve and who your audience is? So what are your big tips for people getting started, people who are really thinking about it?
So when you want to start your own podcast show, a lot of the content out there focuses on the technology side of it, which is what kind of microphones to use, or what kind of software editing tools, or what kind of audio recorders to use. But I believe what is more important is your content and your audience. Those are the two things that I believe podcasters today are not really as focused on. Because you can have a fantastic, the most expensive camera, but if you don't know how to take a photograph, it's just going to be an expensive camera. Likewise with podcasting, you can have the best equipment out there, but if your content doesn't resonate with the audience that you want to reach out to, your podcast is not going to go anywhere. So really, really think about what is the message you want to put out there? What is it that you want people to hear from you or from the guests that you want to bring on your podcast show? And who is it that you're trying to reach out to? How is that your podcast show going to change the lives of the people who are listening to your show? I think those are the things that you need to really focus on.
And, when I talk about social leadership, it's all about get focused and focus on your audience, put yourself in your customer's shoes and be very intentional on both of those fronts, because too many people are all over the place and they're trying to reach everybody, and it's impossible to reach everyone unless you're Oprah Winfrey, right? So that real focus. Would you recommend for people to really start listening to other people's podcasts, try and get interviewed on other people's podcasts as a good starting point, just to learning, how the platform works, the different styles? There's so many different ways people are podcasting. That's the one thing I've noticed as I've been listening to more.
Yeah, that's a great way to start. If you're not too sure if podcasting is the right place for you, just listen to other people's podcasts, being guests on other people's podcasts, even volunteering to help some other podcaster and how they run their podcast. Because the thing about podcasts, it doesn't have an industry standard. The only standard it follows is your standard.
Yeah.
It's up to you how you want to run your podcast show. If you want it to be 5 minutes, if you want it to be 6 hours, it's completely up to you. But the main focus should be what is the message that you want to send out to people and who are the people that you're trying to reach out to. That should be the standard you should follow.
I love the idea of entering a field with no rules.
No rules whatsoever. Podcast, that's why the podcast field is amazing. It's decentralized. Unlike video, most of it is hosted on YouTube. So if you want to find anything, you just go to YouTube. Or the other competitor will be Vimeo. Yeah. But the thing about podcast is there are multiple platforms out there. So if you find a podcast on one platform, it might not exist on another platform, or you find one podcast in multiple platforms. So there's just so much room to play, and it's, not yet regulated by any institution. Yeah. So it's really up to you how you want to do it.
But so that's a good point about the multiple platforms. I know you publish your podcast on probably 5 or 6 different platforms. So why is it important to go into multiple platforms?
It's important because you need to reach out to different audiences. If you're on multiple channels, there are different kinds of listeners who will subscribe to different platforms. I know podcast listeners, they are very loyal, they're very engaged. If they love a certain app, like say Apple Podcasts, they'll only stick to that. They won't change to anything else. If they like to use an app like Castbox or Podcast Addict, they're not going to change to anything else. Yeah. So it's really important to get your podcast shows on these different platforms so that you can reach out to different audiences. But likewise, you also have to think whether your audience are using those platforms or not. If they're not using those platforms, it's no benefit for you to be on there.
And then you got to think about, especially if you're targeting the Asia Pacific market, the majority of people have Android phones. So if you're only uploading onto iTunes, for example, you're potentially missing a whole audience. I mean, you can get iTunes on different devices, but you'd be potentially missing a whole different audience.
Yeah. Because the podcast actually started booming because Apple, they started with iTunes, and they're the ones who coined the word podcast, because the word pod came from iPod, the device from Apple, and cast came from the word broadcast.
Right.
So Apple was the one who pioneered podcasting since 2004, but it's only recently because podcast has become more accessible with smartphones. Then you have Android players coming in, and at one point in time, Apple didn't want to have any of their apps on Android phones. So the only way to access podcasts is through the other apps, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Republic Radio, whatever it is. There's plenty of podcast applications out there, which makes this industry very interesting. Yeah. Compared to YouTube, where, if you have a video, you just put it on YouTube, right?
Yeah, right. That's good. Well, now you can put your videos on LinkedIn, you can put your videos on Facebook. And it's usually better too, because you're going to get more audience. They're going to push more audience to you through the algorithms, right? So the competition in video is starting to open up in an interesting way. But so, when you think when people are getting it wrong, what are they getting wrong?
When they're getting it wrong is when they have an idea without thinking it through and starting their podcast show. So they have this idea of, oh, let me interview all my friends.
Yeah.
And I start a podcast show from there. And sooner or later, they realize they only have that many friends to interview.
Yeah.
And another thing people get wrong is the amount of effort and time it actually takes to put a podcast episode together. So unless you have a podcast team, you have your own audio engineer to do the sound editing for you. If you're doing everything by yourself, it's actually quite a lot of work before, during, and after recording an episode.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the things that's held me back, just because I'm already doing so much, especially because writing is my thing, right? But it looks like a lot of hard yakka to get started, so I've got to overcome that. But when people are failing, what would you say? What's the main reason that people fail? Because I'm expecting it to be the same, that people fail on social media full stop professionally.
Yeah, I think they fail in time. They overestimate. They're very optimistic that they can do it, but they need to allocate the time in order to invest in producing a podcast. So you either have time or have money to produce it.
Yeah, and long-term commitment, consistency,
sustainability.
You've got to be in it for the long haul. If you're not in it for the long haul, don't even bother starting, right?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, all right. I know I want to publish this on LinkedIn, and we've only got 10 minutes to get it live onto LinkedIn. Any parting words to any people out there looking at starting a podcast?
So I know one of the biggest barriers of starting your podcast is making sure that the first episode is perfect. So when you have your first episode recorded, you end up tinkering it, doing audio editing on it, maybe hours on it, and just launch it. Really, if you have something great, if you have something planned out for a season or 2 seasons or months in advance, once you have it recorded, launch it. Yeah. Launch it, learn from your listeners, and evolve your podcast show.
Yeah. Just like I'm going to put this up live, unedited, because I'm useless at editing, but if I waited to edit it, I'd never put any videos anywhere, right? Just get the message out there. If you're really committed, and like anything with social leadership, if you have a powerful why for what you're doing, and there's real meaning and intention behind the words that you want to get out there into the world, it gives you the wings to fly and to really invest in this stuff. But you've got to have the intention in the first place. So just doing it because you think you should isn't powerful. But doing it because you really want to change behaviours, you want to make people laugh, you want to make people cry, make them think, whatever it is, podcasting, video, blogging, just participating on social media. Intention and heart, I think, is the cornerstone of success. There's no shortcuts. There's never any shortcuts. So if you're going to do a podcast, make sure you send me a link and I'll have a listen. And good luck. And good luck with season 3, Ling Ling.
Thank you so much, Andrea.
She's a woman of inspiration. I think she's a role model for her age. She's a role model for me. So I just want to wish you the best of luck. And if you're looking at getting podcasting skills in your corporation, she runs podcasting courses. In fact, I don't know anyone else who does that. So if you're looking to learn, check out the work that Ling Ling's doing. Check out her podcast. She's got Gary Vee as well coming up, which I think is really cool.
It's so amazing to have Gary Vee on the show.
And apparently he didn't even swear. So he obviously has the cultural intelligence required for succeeding in Asia then. But yeah, good luck with season 3. I'm so happy to be connected to you. And this is a lady worth listening to, guys. All right. Take care.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for having me on your show. And you're my role model too for speaking up, for doing stuff to change the world. Yeah, you are my role model. Make this a better place, definitely.
Find a place too.
Yeah.
All right. Bye, guys.